So, we are now on the third week of this sermon series on Paul's letter to the church in Rome. And I want to take just a minute to recap how far we have gotten so far. Not terribly far, we just started the second chapter today. Taking it slow for the moment. So the first thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was that Paul's gospel is that Christ reigns over creation and that we can live in that reign by getting on Team Jesus. This is what he spells out at the beginning of the first chapter as he writes this letter to the church in Rome. Here is what my gospel is. And then he says, with that same group, with that same chapter, with that same introduction, that gospel is God's saving power for everyone who believes, everyone who has faith, everyone who trusts, everyone who gets on Team Jesus. And that raises the question, the minute we use the phrase saving power, the power to save people from what? And so last week we talked about the second half of chapter 1, where Paul gives kind of an answer to that question. And he gives us a vice list, or what I called kind of a wine list, right? Here's what's wrong with the world today. But, as I mentioned last week, Paul is playing us. And Paul isn't specifically playing us, he's playing his audience. If his audience is wondering, if those Christians in Rome are wondering, if that church in Rome is wondering, God's power to save us from what? Paul answers, you know exactly what. God's wrath is coming down on all of those people, you know the ones, all those people who do not know God, all of those people who do not know the law, all of those people who have walked away from God, even though God is obvious, even though the God of the law and the prophets is obvious, even though the God of the Exodus and the promised land is obvious. All of those people who have walked away from that God to worship idols of stone and wood, to do weird stuff in bed, to be slanderers and gossips and murderers, God's wrath is coming down on them. They do not know God. And as he goes through that list, as this letter is read to the church in Rome, the Christians in Rome are nodding along. You're right. God's wrath is coming down on those people who do not know God, on those people who aren't doing the things they are supposed to do, on those people who are doing the things they're not supposed to do. Yeah, God's wrath is coming down on them. And Paul says, you're right, God's wrath is coming down on them because they do not know God. So what is your excuse? You who know God. You who know the God of the law and the prophets, you who know the God of the Exodus and the promised land, you who know the stories, you who can recite the commandments, you who worship the one true God. Because, let me tell you, I know that you do all the same stuff. You do the things you're not supposed to do. You don't do the things you are supposed to do. And, well, because of that, people think poorly of you, church in Rome. Because you say one thing and you do a different thing. And actually worse, Paul goes on, actually worse, you teach people what to do and what not to do, and then you do a different thing. And people see that. People know that. And speak poorly of you. And speak poorly of God. Because what kind of people say one thing and do another. It's a pretty easy charge to make. It is a charge that is common throughout history. It is a charge that is made to the church today, at the church today, against the church today. What a bunch of hypocrites. What a bunch of people who say that they care about this, but show that they care about this. What a bunch of people who say one thing and do another. And I'll tell you, it's a fair charge. Because I say one thing and do another. I get up here and I preach a good game, but I don't live up to my own sermons. I know that. I know that I could do better. I know that I am a little bit of a hypocrite. And I mean, I try not to be, but I don't always try that hard. And it is so easy to pull out the Bible and say this, or to pull out the creeds and say this, or to pull out a statement of faith and say this, but then get caught up in the world as it is and play according to the rules of the world as it is. It is a fair charge. But I'm not sure that it is quite what Paul is getting at. And I'm not sure that it's quite what Paul is getting at, because later on, he is going to say something else. Later on, in chapter 7, he's going to write this. What then should we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. Not there yet. Proved to be death to me. The common way of reading this, or at least a common way of reading this, is to say, well, if we didn't have the law, if we didn't have the commandments, if we didn't have the rules, if we didn't have the stuff, it wouldn't even occur to us to break them. There's this little part in us, this little bit of us, this little spirit in us that sees a rule and thinks, I'm going to break that. That little part of us that says, no parking, I am definitely parking there. That little part of us that says, no entry beyond this point, I definitely want to see what's in there. That little part of us that says, do not feed the bears, that says, I'm bringing all of the picnic baskets. And there's an easy reading of this that says that's what's going on. If I had never been told not to covet, it would never have occurred to me to covet. But I'm not sure that's not true. I'm not sure that that is true. Sorry, other way around. I'm not sure that that is true. Because let's face it, I don't need to know what it is to want what someone else has to want what someone else has. I don't need to be told not to do that, to do that. It is easy to look at what somebody else has and say, wow, I wish I had that. And not just in general, but that particular one, just so they can't have it. If you have a brother, you know what I mean. I'm going to use a different commandment to illustrate what I think is actually going on here. You shall not steal. We all know what stealing is. We all have a clear idea in our head. You shall not steal. You shall not take as your own that which belongs to someone else. And I don't think that I need the commandment to sometimes have that desire, to sometimes think, I could just take that. It would probably be okay. Even if most of the time I don't think that. But the problem is that the same law that says, you shall not steal, condones slavery? And what is slavery if not stealing? If not stealing people, if not stealing people's labor, if not stealing people's dignity, even worse, if not stealing people's humanity. And when it gets to be too much, which is almost immediately stealing someone's life, it's so easy for that to tip in to you shall not kill. How can the same law that says you shall not steal allow for slavery? Or something a little closer to home? What about wage theft? What about just not paying people what they're owed? What about making someone work through a break or shaving a couple of dollars off of their paycheck? Wage theft in the United States, even though we don't think about it very often, the number of dollars dwarf other forms of stealing. Is that not stealing? And if we say, you shall not steal, mustn't we pay people what they're owed? And when we fail to do that, are we not breaking the commandment? Or worse, what about just not paying people enough in the first place? What about saying your labor, your work, your 40 hours a week are worth minimum wage, and that's not enough to live on? You can't afford an apartment on that, let alone food, let alone childcare, let alone all the things that you need in order to survive, and not only survive, but thrive. If I don't pay someone enough, even if I stick to the letter of the law, am I not a little bit stealing from them? I can make this even worse. And early Christians did. John Chrysostom, Basil of Caesarea. If I have a pair of shoes that I am not wearing, and somebody else is walking around unshod, I have stolen their shoes, even though they don't know that those shoes belong to them. For God has put enough and more than enough into the world, and if the distribution is messed up, that is the fault of those who have too much, not those who have too little. If I have food in my cupboard that is spoiling in my cupboard, and somebody else is having the pains of hunger, then I have stolen their food, even if they don't know that it was their food. For God has ensured that there's enough and more than enough. And if the distribution is off, that is the problem of those of us who have too much, not those who have too little. If there is one person who does not have what they need, while I have more than enough, am I not a thief? And I want to be fair. I was born into it. I have been a thief since the beginning. I have stolen since my mother conceived me. See, this is the problem with the law. This is the problem with the rules. Once you take them seriously, the fact that they are broken is everywhere around you. If I looked hard enough, I could find all of the ways that I have stolen. If I look hard enough, I can find all of the ways that I have killed. If I look hard enough, I can find all of the idols that I have made, all of the ways that I have coveted, all of the ways that I have broken just 10 commandments. and more still besides. And so, if I believe what Scripture has so often said, that I will be judged in the manner that I judge, that my debts will be forgiven as much as I forgive others' debts, that the same law by which I demand others live, I have to live, then all I am doing by having those laws, all I am doing by trying to live by those laws, all I am doing by trying to abide by the rules is forging the very chains that will bind me. Because insofar as the law is about bringing about justice, it is reaching for something it cannot grasp. Insofar as the rules are about helping me be righteous, I am reaching for something I cannot attain. There is a difference. There is a difference. There's an unbridgeable gap between being law-abiding and being righteous. Let me say that again. There is a difference. There is a difference. There's an unbridgeable gap between being law-abiding and being righteous. And so if we are focused on being law-abiding, if we are focused on following the rules, no matter what the law is, no matter what the rules are, well, then we're not going to make it. We just can't do the thing. The law is not enough. Now that's where this section of Paul's letter to the Romans stopped, but I don't want to stop there because we are in trouble if we stop there. But next week we're going to get into what Paul is going to suggest is the answer to this problem. That it is not the law that saves us, it is our faith in Christ that saves us. That we can step out from under the law, no matter what that law is, that we can step out from under the rules, no matter what those rules are, and simply trust God. And that trusting God opens up all sorts of amazing possibilities. That if we trust that God has given us enough and more than enough, well, why not share instead of stealing? If we trust that God has made every person a beloved child of God, why not support life rather than end it? If we trust in God, and that God is merciful and gracious and loving, and so we judge with mercy and grace and love, then will not God judge us the same way? And is that not good news?